Facts. Yeah, facts. We tell you facts. All the facts.
I feel like I finally gotten the hang of this, so I actually like have it organized in coherent sections. And I have a fun fact section. So it's like, yeah, we finally hit our stride. It took us 3 episodes, or 3 things, but here we go. So here are some fun facts. You know, math. I've never been good. I can't be good at like all the things. I have to be very bad at some of them, and math is that for me. Mental math specifically. But yes, let's give you some fun facts about N.K. Jemisin. That I have, after reading a ton of stuff about her life, I was like, all right, these are things that are just like fun, but I don't know if they fit anywhere else in this section. So I'll talk about this again, but they live in Brooklyn. She's part of a writing group called Altered Fluid. She's the first author in the genre's history to win 3 consecutive Best Novel Hugo Awards for her Broken Earth trilogy. In addition to writing, she has been a counseling psychologist, an educator, a hiker, a biker, a political feminist, anti-racist blogger, and she also at one point used to write for a book review science fiction and fantasy column called Otherworldly, and she's covered that for 3 years. Her reviews can still be found online. She likes to garden and game in her spare time, which is cool. I was like, gaming?
She's such a nerd, and I love it.
Yeah. So she plays Skyrim.
Yeah, and Mass Effect.
Yeah. So it's like huge. I love that for just existing. And she has a cat
named Ozymandias.
Yes. And she's only 41. She didn't start writing and publishing until her late 20s, early 30s.
Amazing.
So
the world,
guys.
You can do it.
If you're the just 30 crowd, you can do it at 30. You can just be like, I decide now.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do, and go do it. So
like, hey guys, actually, I'm a writer. You can say that now. Let's do it.
Literally, that's what happened. She was like, well, she wrote like her whole life, but like also didn't start like genuinely like pursuing publishing and stuff until her like end of her 20s, early 30s, when she like had a crisis, which I'll talk about that more. But she also apparently writes fan fiction, which I thought was very fun, and using a handful of secret identities that she has not shared. She's very like protective over those identities.
She also still writes fan fiction.
Yes.
Like to this day. Such a nerd. I love her.
Yeah, she's cool. She's really cool. And she's not that much older than us. We could be friends, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
If we ever.
Yeah, I have friends her age.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, but I don't know if we're like cool enough that she would want.
She would find us.
Yeah, but like more so, we're of similar ages that maybe.
Yeah. Come on, Jemisin. Talk to us.
Yeah. But let me tell you a little bit about her life. N.K. Jemisin, the N and K stand for Nora Keita, which is such a cool middle name. And she was born on September 19th, 1972 in Iowa City, Iowa. It's funny because she was born in Iowa City, Iowa, and then she lived in New York City, New York. So I just thought that was like a funny correlation. She was only there briefly, and her family moved to New York City when she turned 1. In an article on The New Yorker titled N.K. Jemisin's Dream Worlds, written by Rafi Kachadorian, they give a lot of background on her family. I'm very thankful to this article. It's kind of like the one that I found when I was researching Octavia Butler. They wrote so much about her life. I'm like, thank you. You've solved all the missing pieces. So thank you very much to them for writing this article. Her father's name was Noah Jemisin, and her mother's name was Janice Jemisin. I looked many places to try to find her mother's maiden name. It does not exist. So she is Janice Jemisin. And they met at college at Alabama State University and got married soon after. Her father was born in Birmingham, Alabama. And in the article that I mentioned, they state that he lived where the commissioner of the public safety allowed the Ku Klux Klan to attack the Freedom Riders when their Greyhound buses arrived in 1961. Her father spent part of his youth dodging dogs and fire hoses turned on him and other civil rights protesters. So there's a little background on him. The newly married couple left Alabama and moved to Iowa City, Iowa, because Noah wanted to devote his life to painting and had applied to graduate program at the university there. Jemisin's mother applied there as well, pursuing a degree in psychology with specialization in psychometrics, so like testing. following Jemisin's birth, they moved to Brooklyn, and her father taught art and her mother taught grade school science. Apparently, her father has a painting at the Met called Black Valhalla, and in the blog that you can find on our website, I link an image for it.
Nice.
A link to it's still up at the Met. And it was really cool. Jemisin was very fond of the NYC house that they lived in and described it in the article I mentioned. We were in a beautiful little brownstone. We had the ground floor and the floor above. There was a gorgeous old mahogany banister. There were grapevines in the backyard and a squirrel named Greedy who would come seeking pecans that my grandmother would send me from her tree in Alabama. So she really loved the house that was in New York, but at the age of 5, her parents divorced, and Jemisin went with her mother to Mobile, Alabama, returning to NYC in the summers. This move was very hard for Jemisin, and because of this, as a means of escape, she spent many hours at the local library, and this ultimately led to her starting her writing around the age of 8 years old.
Crazy.
She apparently started self-publishing, like in quotes, handwritten books binded with cardboard and yarn, which was just super cute. And yeah, so it was a very hard experience, this kind of transition between the two places. So just a content warning for my next paragraph. I do talk briefly about hate crimes and racism, just so you know. So take a 2-minute break, come back if you do not want to hear about that. So as I said, Jemisin really did not enjoy her time in Alabama. She specifically said she hated it because of the regimentation of Southern society and the quasi-suburban alienation, as well as racism. In an incident that is described in the New Yorker article I mentioned, when she was in 4th grade, the KKK burned a cross in the Mobile courthouse lawn and then murdered a Black teenager named Michael Donald as he was walking home from the store. This lynching took place not far from her grandmother's house, and the incident really impacted her and her family. In a speech that she made in 2013 while she was recalling this, she said, "I remember my grandmother sitting in her den with a shotgun across her knees while I cracked pecans at her feet. I was maybe 9 years old and had no idea what was going on. She told me the gun was just an old replica she'd brought in to clean it. And I just said, okay, Grandma, and asked whether she'd made me a pie when I was done." But obviously that was a very traumatic thing that happened very close to her. Her grandma lived. And this kind of traveling back and forth between Alabama and New York continued to impact Jemisin, specifically in the very big differences in crossing the Mason-Dixon line from both the societal, social, and personal standpoint. The shifting of racial divisions in Mobile led to her attending a predominantly white school that had been forced to desegregate. And she would have to ride an hour bus ride to get to the school each day, specifically so she could exchange comic books with her white friends, which she had to do behind the school. As a way of dealing with the world and kind of just the realities that she was dealing with, as I said, she spent a lot of time at the library as a form of coping and escapism, to read and write. That was her favorite thing to do, and is where she spent the bulk of her time. So this helped her not only develop her writing style, but also further developed her love of fantasy and science fiction. Specifically, Jemisin fell in love with comics and science fiction at a young age. She loved space and the world's fantasy that space could be built upon, and specifically the way in which fantasy was written. It allowed some sort of structure and logic, even though they were in fantastical worlds. So specifically in dealing with her parents' divorce, Jemisin felt little about her real life she didn't think it was cohesive. So Jemisin felt like her real life wasn't cohesive. And because of this, she really enjoyed the completeness of the imagined world. So the world building and the way that they existed in these kind of self-contained logic bound places. But with still these really awesome and cool ideas. She loved science fiction novels so much that she would read them in class, covering them with paper to hide the titles from her teachers. And in the New Yorker, she said, "I saw Star Wars when it came out because I was a creepy, obsessed space child." Jemisin kind of took this love of Star Wars and the love of science fiction and fantasy and just really dove into that. She pushed through so many novels and this like love of science fiction and the novels surrounding it made her write even more, like constantly. She was just constantly writing. And she would, her cousin recounts a time where they would spend a lot of time in front of her grandmother's house in the sun, writing, drawing, and talking. Her cousin was W. Kamau Bell, and they said, we bonded over the fact that we felt like aliens in Mobile. The differences in her parenting styles also impacted Jemisin well. Her mother was a standardized test giver, as I said, and her father was an artist. So two very different ways to go towards the world. So these differences made it so her mother had a really hard time understanding her love of otherworldly fantasies in writing. Because they weren't really like, for her mother's perspective, they weren't really based in like logic or science, or even though sometimes they are, but like it was all very fantastical. So she had a hard time understanding her love of it, as well as just like her love of writing in general. Her father, however, did understand as an artist, and spent most of their summers together. They would stay up really late together watching Star Trek and The Twilight Zone. And her father also encouraged her to explore the city and create, really like pushing her to be more creative and like explore that further. And this was really cute. They would spend a lot of time coexisting, just working on their passions. So he would be like in his office painting, and like she would be like in the den, like writing. And they would just kind of like, they wouldn't talk very much, but they would just like both work on what they loved in this like kind of coexisting space, which I thought was really sweet. And her dad was actually apparently her first real editor, like not in the literal sense of publishing and editing in that way, but she described it as one of her favorite memories of them was walking around the Williamsburg Bridge. This was before it got renovated. It had holes in it. You had to be careful or you would lose a foot. I would talk over story ideas and plot lines, and he would just listen to all of that. So a lot of her early ideas were things that like she talked about with her father and like got his feedback on, which was cool. While her father was a supporter of her writing, her mother's influence ultimately won out in that exchange at first. As I said, she did not start pursuing writing as more than a hobby until her late 20s, early 30s. So this kind of stayed as is for many years. Her main focus was, as many of us have, to afford life, rent, bills, and to survive in this capitalistic hellscape. So she pursued just like exclusively that route for many years. She just wanted to be able to afford to live. So writing, as this, it was a side hustle. It was like specifically just a hobby, a coping like her way of escaping, as it had been like when she was little. And she kind of used that to keep her sane. It describes as she moved kind of around the U.S. and in her teaching roles and jobs that she did not like very much. As she got older, she attended Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and she graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, taking after her mother in that way, who also had a degree in psychology. She went on to receive a master's in education from the University of Maryland at College Park, and she became a career counselor at a college in Springfield, Massachusetts for a while. She did not like Massachusetts very much. One reason being like the weather and climate. It was cold and lake effect snow. She said it was isolated. She did not like it very much. She continued writing, as I said, mostly as a hobby, and that was kind of what kept her sane. She participated in writing groups as well, and as we said, anonymously participated in fan fiction, which she still does. She eventually worked at Northeastern University in Boston, but did not like Boston very much either, as it was still in Massachusetts. Did not like it there. It was when she turned 30 that she kind of had this crisis, and she stated, I was like, oh my God, I am in debt to my eyeballs. I hate this town. I don't like my boyfriend. I have got to reorder this. What do I need to do to be happy? Okay, get out of debt, get out of Boston, get into writing. Maybe make some money from it. Maybe that can help. So after that kind of like epiphany, she attended the Viable Paradise writing workshop and then started seeking publication seriously. From there, she started to submit her works to publishers and agents. She found an agent in 2005, and her first novel, The Killing Moon, was published in 2012. But it did not initially sell well since the industry was not welcoming to inclusive fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Way of saying,
Wasn't and still isn't entirely.
That the industry is racist, and that is
Mm-hmm.
why she did not have success so much at the beginning. She received many rejections that she was certain were racially based, code from the same editorial bigotry that Delaney faced in the 60s. She even came very close to quitting. She said, "I came very close to quitting. I had a long, dark tea time of the soul, and basically somewhere in there I realized people are just that racist. If the only problem is that the book is full of Black people, okay, I got you. I'm going to write something full of white people, but it's going to be all about how evil those white people are." And The 100,000 Kingdoms was that book. It was me getting mad at the science fiction publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And she did find success in writing, just even with all that happening. And many of her books have won awards. As I said before, she is the first Black person ever to have won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, and is the first author in the genre's history to have won it 3 times in a row. What won it the first time was the book that we're covering next week.
Mm-hmm.
So on her website, also, she describes her writing most frequent themes as resistance to oppression, the severability of the liminal, which I had to look up what both of those words meant. And the coolness of stuff blowing up. So she often
Can
writes.
you explain what inseverability of the liminal is then?
Sure. Liminal it's related to a transitional or initial stage of process, occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold, and the inseverability of that divide/threshold, which makes sense considering most of her life she was traveling back and forth between the North and the South.
Mm-hmm.
As Gabe will get into when they start talking about their section, she often writes very on the nose and unapologetically on topics she covers, and that's been very important to her to be honest in her fantasy. And Gabe will get more into the writing theme styles, the actual things that they've written and stuff like that. But there is a fun little fact section on their website, for Jemisin's website, on the questions she most often receives from interviewees, to kind of just get them out of the way. And I just thought it might be fun to share those because they were cool. So the first question that she says she gets a lot is, "So you're Black and a woman in science fiction? What's that all about?" I understand why these questions are important. It is disheartening that people keep asking them, however, or some version of them. At this point, for me, these questions are a reflection of the larger problem that for those of us who are other, we are constantly called upon to explain our existence. Therefore, I ask the interviewers stop doing it and think of something more interesting to ask. The next question is, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? She says, "Always. As a kid, I devoured books at the library, and at home, I would make my own handwritten books with cardboard covers and yarn binding. It took a while for me to decide to do it professionally, but I've been a writer for as long as I can remember." The next question is, how did you become a writer? So nobody bought the ones with the cardboard covers, so I had to try something new, was her joke answer. But her serious answer was, "I've been writing since the age of 8 or so, and only began seriously seeking publication in my late 20s and early 30s. I started with a writing workshop, Viable Paradise, and from there I joined a writing group and wrote short stories to hone my craft and novels to tell the stories I wanted to tell. I sent the stories to magazines and to book agents. Once I found the right agent for myself, we then worked together for several years before The 100,000 Kingdoms sold. I kept a folder of rejections as motivation to keep going. I don't know where that folder is anymore, which feels like a good measure of success, if as anything else." So for anyone who's trying to become a writer, the next question is, how do I become a writer? To which she says, "Unfortunately, there is no one way to answer this question. You become a writer by writing. If that in itself makes you happy, you've succeeded already. To have a writing career means a lot of small business management, market research, patience, and perseverance. the good news is that social media and the internet have made it much easier to do this work than it was when I started out. The bad news is no one can really give you the patience and perseverance except yourself. It can be helpful to form a solid group of fellow writers seeking publication, either as a general support or as a dedicated writing group. But in the end, it all comes down to you. Good luck. And how do you keep writing? Which I thought this one was one of my favorites, just because it was cute. By not writing sometimes. Diligence is very important for a writer, especially a writer on contract. However, if that's all you do, you will absolutely burn out. And recovery time for burnouts is not quick. So in order to keep writing, I travel, read, write, just for fun / to myself, and occasionally play Skyrim. So the fan fiction is a part of that, you know? That's why it's so cool, is because they still have these like awesome hobbies. That is their like not writing time. And also like they write reviews for other people who are writing, as you saw. You found the one for of course, now that we're saying words, I forget their name. The person we're covering next.
For Sylvia Moreno Garcia.
Yes. She wrote a review for her book. So I was like, oh, that's so cool.
Which is why we switched.
Yeah. No, it's super fun.
We switched over to that book because I was like, well, if N.K. Jemisin likes it, then we're going to like it.
Yeah, like guarantee we're going to think it's great.
Yeah.
I have total trust. Yeah. So yeah, they're really cool as like a person, it seems. Like they're nerds like us, geeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just cool that they were like, I'm going to do it. But that like, it wasn't when they were like 18. They were like, they say like by 30 you're gonna figure out your stuff, and it's like she was like at 30 she's like, I don't know, but we're gonna try, and then just did it.
Figure it out.
It's hard to like
this ain't it
fresh at 30, so like that's huge, and she really pulled it off and is amazing. So
yeah, NK, be our friend.
Yeah,
a lot of like what she says really reminds me of our friend Wimoto Naoka of Jessie Projects and Black Women Are Scary. Similarly with just this idea, like, because Wimoto writes like fantasy and horror, like a lot of genre work. Same thing with Eunice Levi's, who we talked to in our community care episode. But both of them, it's just like, we just are existing, and that's everyone wants to know why we're existing. Like she gets so worn out when people are like, tell us more about your struggles, and she's like, just take my work is good. Read my books.
We don't need to have like a trauma porn session instead.
To validate why I'm in this space. Like I could just make something that is fun, and that is enough. And it's because there's not enough fun out there with us just existing in it. And like, that's the problem. Like the bare minimum is just let us be also here in your envisioned futures in other worlds.
100%.
And then we'll be like chilling, hanging out with NK, Tanana Reeve. I'd hang out with her too. Everyone, hang out with us. Be your friend.
Let's start a writing group. Maybe that'll
Sylvia Moreno Garcia, be my friend.